Okay, so in the previous videos, we've looked at XML and bringing that into a web page using XHTTP request. Now, we're going to move on to JSON, which is JavaScript Object Notation, and this is a markup language that's becoming increasing in popularity. It's becoming prevalent, essentially. And so when it comes to working with APIs for platforms, especially Google-based platforms and Facebook-based platforms, these are the kinds of languages that you'll be receiving the responses to requests with. And so if I just go back to our original XML file, and you can have a look at that structure. It's quite long-winded, but it is ordered, and it's pretty simple to read once you've got your head around the basics. JSON, on the other hand, might look quite intimidating for the first look. So this document I've now translated into JSON, and this doesn't have the document type declaration or anything anymore. It's just simply an object, and this object is defined by a square bracket at the start and a square bracket at the end. And inside of it, it can also have more objects, like we've had in XML. If we class this album as an object that contains all of the properties, title, artist, etc., JSON can also do that. So it's defined then by a curly bracket. Curly bracket at the start and curly bracket at the end. This is essentially what's known as an array in programming languages, because it's a variable that contains multiple values, or more specifically, multiple variable value pairs. So inside of those two curly brackets I've just pointed out, you can probably see the word title and then a colon. And after that colon, we've got the value. So that is essentially, the variable name is title, the value is who can you trust, and then there's a comma that separates it. And you can have as many values in there as you like. You could have additional values, and so it does allow you to have a bit more fluidity around this kind of organization, whereas your XML structure is quite rigid in comparison. Also, this is a lot shorter because you don't have the open close tags, you just have the name and the value, and so as a consequence it is much shorter. In this example I've made it quite short because I've got rid of an object for image, or cover as I called it in XML. So I called it in cover, which contained the values of the path for the image and also the image alt. Now notice I've got word wrap on, so this is the same line down here, and that's why it goes to blank free. So I've got image alt, video path, and that's everything. And after the closing curly bracket, I have a comma. And there's a comma between each object until you reach the end of them, and then the last one doesn't need a comma at the end. So I have 3 objects in there, and that is my JSON file. So it's called musicstore.json. Be wary when you create a new file in Dreamweaver.json, it puts a JavaScript comment in, but you want to delete that because it doesn't always work when that comment's in there. Okay, so I've uploaded that file already to the server, and now I've got some examples to show you based on the same principles as the XML files. So we will skip through this relatively quickly. There are some distinct differences in how we access things, but they are pretty simple to grasp, especially when you've got an understanding of XML anyway. Okay, so the document I've used is basically the first file we created in XML, and I've made some changes. So all of the HTML at the start is the same, the body, that's all the same, the method, that's the same, all of this bit here, exactly the same. The file that we're opening, it's a different name because it's a JSON file, but then again, these two lines are essentially the same, just asking for a different file. I have changed my variable names. This is mainly for context more than anything, because it'd be silly to call the variable in here XML when it's JSON that we're handling. So inside of my function, I've now called XML doc JSON doc instead. And instead of it being XML dot response text, it's JSON response text, which refers to what's coming from this part here, which in turn is due to the fact that we've called the function as soon as the document's ready and then got the response to our XML HTTP request. So it can do more than just request XML, as stated in the last session. I've then used console log to get out the information, the response text. And if we look at that file, we should see that I've outputted with some pre-formatting pre-tags the JSON, so it looks essentially like the JSON file with no changes. And I've also console logged it, so if I F12, you can see there the file is shown. Moving forwards is then the same as we worked with XML about formatting and access. Okay, so I can get to the JSON in the same format as it is in the file that I'm getting it from. I now need to manipulate it, and this is known as parsing. Parse just means to read. So there is a function in JavaScript, and it's called parse, and it comes under JSON, that's all caps by the way, .parse, and that will allow me to parse that information that's coming from the response text as we used in the previous file, and I've changed the name to JSON array because essentially we're going to have an array of information. And when I console log that information, so if I look at file 7, you'll just see in the console there is the object. So it says object, 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 and that's because there's 3 objects. And inside of those, that main object, I've got 1, which is artist Morchiba, who can you trust? 2, Foster the People Torches, and 3, Pigeon Detectives Emergency. I have also, in this one, I think I'm looking at a different file, on the server at least. You'll notice in this example on the screen that I've also got image with image alt and image path inside of it. And that's just recreating an object within an object, but that's something I'd like to cover at a later point. So I will just refresh this file and refresh this in the page, and we should see now that it's essentially just the value variable pairs that I've shown in Dreamweaver a second ago. So we've got artist and the value, image alt and the value, image path and the value, the price and the value, the title and the value, and the video path and the value. The same for the others. And length is a property we can access, and that's free because it's counted them. And that's a very useful property because when we want to access this information, we will be using that property too. So we've passed all this information into an array, and that means we can now work with it. So the following example file, which isn't much longer, there's 27, 28 lines of code. have a look at it. This shows you what you get out when you try to put the whole array into HTML. So this is the same as I've just shown you in example file 6, essentially, in terms of HTML, this line here. But unfortunately, we can't access everything in this way. What we need to do is to start referring to specific bits of information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refer to a specific piece of information. I'm going to tell it the JSON array, and then in square brackets, this is how you access what's known as an index inside of an array. So the index I'm going to try and access is 0, the first index, dot title. I'm just going to save that and upload it again. And you will see that the title from the first album, index 0, has come out. So there's index 0. And inside of index 0, we've got the title, which itself is the index, and who can you trust is the value of that index. The two types of index you can have in an array, a numeric one, and then you can have a character-based one, which are more meaningful and obviously preferable for this kind of application. So we can see there that you can access anything within the array just by using what's essentially an address. And the way that we build upon that is we then create a for loop. The for loop, as we've used previously. And so all I'm doing in this for loop example to start off with is putting out the title into the console log before I start doing anything with it. So I've got the full array coming out here. I might just cancel that out for now. And I've got a for loop. I'll start with I equals 0, so that's my initialization of the variable. Strictly speaking, I should probably put the keyword var in front of that. And then as it gets bigger, it will look to see if it's less than the length of that array. And as we looked in the console previously, where it tells you the length, there we know the size of the array. So it would count that, keep on going through, and then console log the titles. So this number here will get bigger. We'll go 0, 1, 2. So if we just have a look at example 9. See in the console, the title's coming out, who can you trust? Torch is an emergency. So moving on from there to the final file, which is essentially the same as the final XML example, with the same styling. So I've pulled all the styling from that file previously. Nothing different there, because I'm going to format everything the same way for this one. And then I've got a for loop the same as before. However, I've now added instead, so coming from this file here, which is the basics of it, I've added a new section, inserted adjacent HTML, a new image, the image path, setting the attribute, the iframe, attributes there for the iframe, and then appending the child to those sections, and then appending everything to the target element, which is the div tag in the HTML file. So in previous XML examples, we've looked at this in a lot more detail, especially from the perspective of JavaScript. In this example, all we're really interested in looking at is here. So we're referencing JSON array I.title there. That'll give us the title. We've put it in H2 tag again. JSON array I.artist, so that's the artist name, something we didn't use in the previous example. The image, we've just used JSON array I.image path. And then with the video path, JSON array I.video path. And so that differs quite a lot if I was to just open up the fifth file we did for XML in terms of how much information has to be typed. So that's how much information it would be to get the title out of an XML file versus this. So it's easy to see it's a lot more efficient both in the JSON file itself and in the way that it's accessed from within a HTML file. Okay, so if you would like to have a go at that, I'll just scroll through this slowly. So HTML document, as is with the previous ones, style tags there, the same styling inside the head. In the body, same div tag, same ID, demo, and then inside the script, the bit that's making all of this work from there onwards, the same XML HTTP request, a slightly different file name, but it's the same method, get. It's asynchronous, we send, same function name, and just ever so slightly different nuances. One of the biggest differences, passing the JSON response text, which in itself is also a lot simpler. Okay, and we'll leave it at that.